Right now, 600 meters beneath the South Atlantic, an animal is awake in the dark. It is the heaviest invertebrate on Earth. It weighs well over 1,000 pounds. It has no bones, no spine, no shell. It lives where sunlight has never reached, in water just above freezing, surrounded by permanent darkness. We've known this animal exists for almost 100 years, and yet until recently, no human being had ever seen one alive in its natural habitat. Not because we weren't looking, because it always saw us first. Our submersibles are impossible to hide. They're covered in bright lights. They make noise. They disturb the water. To us, they're sophisticated research vehicles. To an animal that evolved in complete darkness, they're impossible to miss. By the time our cameras reached the deep sea, the colossal squid was already gone. Again, and again, and again. Until March 9th, 2025. If you enjoy discovering the science before the documentaries and textbooks catch up, subscribe. Every week we explore famous prehistoric animals and extraordinary living creatures through the newest scientific discoveries. The story of the colossal squid begins in a way almost no other species does. Not with a complete skeleton, not with a living animal, not even with a body. It began with two severed arms. In 1925, whalers operating near the Falkland Islands cut open the stomach of a sperm whale. Inside, among the remains of countless deep-sea creatures, they found something unusual. Two enormous squid arms, unlike anything scientists had ever seen. That was all they had. No head, no mantle, no eyes, no complete animal. Just two detached arms recovered from the stomach of its predator. And somehow, that was enough to describe a new species. Imagine discovering an elephant by finding only its trunk inside the stomach of another animal. That's essentially how the colossal squid entered science. For decades, almost everything we learned about this mysterious creature came from leftovers. A beak recovered from a whale, fragments tangled in fishing gear, pieces of tissue, scars left behind on predators. The animal itself remained almost completely invisible. In fact, the first relatively intact specimen wasn't recovered until 1981, nearly 60 years after the species had already been named. Think about that. One of the largest animals on Earth, known almost entirely through fragments. Everything scientists believed about its anatomy, its behavior, its size, its hunting strategy, had to be reconstructed from pieces, like trying to understand an entire book after finding only a handful of torn pages. Which is exactly why March 9th, 2025 became such an extraordinary day. Researchers aboard the research vessel Falkor 2 were exploring the waters surrounding the South Sandwich Islands, one of the most remote places anywhere on Earth. Far south in the Atlantic Ocean, closer to Antarctica than to civilization. Their mission wasn't even to find a colossal squid. They were conducting an ocean census expedition searching for undiscovered marine life. As always, the remotely operated vehicle slowly descended into the darkness, 600 meters, almost complete blackness, just the vehicle's lights cutting through the water. Then, something drifted into the beam. It wasn't enormous, it wasn't terrifying, it wasn't even dark. It measured barely 30 centimeters long, almost completely transparent. For a few seconds, nobody on board understood what they were looking at. The animal simply floated in front of the cameras, suspended in the water as if gravity no longer existed. The crew captured screenshots and immediately sent them to cephalopod specialist Aaron Evans. What happened next says everything about how unexpected this discovery really was. Evans didn't quietly review the images. He contacted another squid expert, Kat Bolstad, at Auckland University of Technology. Together they studied every visible detail: the body, the fins, the proportions, the developing hooks. Then the realization hit. Years later, Evans would describe that moment with complete honesty. I started hyperventilating, because after nearly 100 years, humanity was looking at something nobody had ever seen before, a living colossal squid. Not inside a whale, not washed onto a beach, not caught accidentally in a fishing net. Alive, moving freely through its own world. Almost exactly 100 years after the species had first been described from two severed arms. And then, the footage revealed something no one had expected. The animal was almost completely transparent. Its internal organs were visible through its body. The developing digestive system, the tiny beak, even the earliest stages of its enormous eyes. Scientists had always imagined the colossal squid as a dark, muscular predator. Instead, life begins almost like glass, completely translucent, nearly invisible. Only later, as the squid matures and descends deeper into the ocean, does its body gradually darken into the powerful adult described from recovered specimens. But perhaps the most surprising part wasn't what the juvenile looked like. It was what it didn't do. It didn't flee. Adults almost certainly detect our vehicles long before we ever detect them. They've spent millions of years evolving in complete darkness, avoiding the one predator capable of hunting them. But this juvenile had never encountered anything like a remotely operated vehicle. It didn't recognize the lights as danger. It simply hovered there, curious, weightless, completely unaware that it had just become one of the most important marine discoveries of the century. Type seen in the comments if you already knew the colossal squid had finally been filmed alive. Or type never if this is the first time you've heard the story. I read every comment, because now we arrive at the part that completely changes how we think about this animal. Before that footage in March 2025, almost everything scientists believed about the colossal squid had been reconstructed from dead specimens. The anatomy, the behavior, even the way it moved. Almost all of it was educated inference, but once researchers finally watched one alive, every one of those ideas suddenly became much more real. And the deeper you look into its biology, the stranger it becomes. Let's start with something that sounds like science fiction. The colossal squid has 3 hearts, not one. 3. 2 smaller hearts pump blood through the gills, where oxygen is absorbed from the water. A third, much larger heart circulates that oxygen-rich blood throughout the body. For an animal living in freezing, oxygen-poor water, that system isn't a luxury. It's survival. But the blood itself is even more unusual. Human blood is red because it carries oxygen using iron. The colossal squid uses copper instead. Its blood is blue. The molecule responsible is called hemocyanin. And in the icy depths of the Southern Ocean, hemocyanin performs better than iron ever could. It binds oxygen more efficiently in cold, low-oxygen environments, allowing the squid to function where many other large animals simply couldn't survive. In other words, its blue blood isn't an odd curiosity. It's one of the reasons this giant exists at all. Type blue if the copper-based blood surprised you, or known if you already knew some cephalopods use hemocyanin instead of hemoglobin. And somehow, that's still not the strangest adaptation. Because the colossal squid has a design flaw unlike anything else in the animal kingdom, its brain forms a ring. Literally. The esophagus passes directly through the center of that ring. Every meal this animal ever eats travels through its own brain. Stop and picture that for a second. Anything too large to fit through that opening could damage the nervous system itself. Which means the colossal squid can never swallow large prey whole, no matter how hungry it is. Everything must first be cut into small pieces. That's why its beak is so important. Hard, razor-sharp. Shaped much like the beak of a parrot, long before food reaches the stomach. The beak reduces it into fragments small enough to pass safely through the brain. It's an extraordinary solution to an equally extraordinary anatomical problem. And there's another reason scientists know so much about that beak. It's often the only part of the squid that survives digestion. When sperm whales feed on colossal squid, nearly the entire body is broken down. Muscle disappears, skin disappears, soft tissue is gone. The beak remains. For decades, those beaks were some of the only direct evidence that colossal squid even existed. Entire chapters of its biology were reconstructed from the few pieces whales couldn't digest. Then there's the body itself. A 1,000-pound animal should sink like a stone, yet the colossal squid barely seems to swim. Instead, it floats. Its tissues contain large amounts of ammonia-rich fluid, reducing its overall density and making the animal almost neutrally buoyant. Imagine a creature the size of a small car, suspended effortlessly in complete darkness, barely moving, barely spending energy, simply waiting. The deep ocean carries food toward it. Not the other way around. Everything about this animal is designed to conserve energy. Because 600 meters below the surface, every movement has a cost, and wasting energy can mean starving before the next meal arrives. That's why the juvenile filmed in 2025 looked almost motionless. At first glance, it appeared passive, almost fragile. But in reality, it was behaving exactly as evolution intended, perfectly adapted to one of the harshest environments on Earth. Then scientists turned their attention to one feature that has puzzled researchers for decades: its eyes. And that's where the story becomes even stranger, because the colossal squid doesn't simply have large eyes. It has the largest eyes ever known in the history of life. Not just among squid, not just among marine animals, among every animal that has ever lived. Each eye of a fully grown adult measures roughly 27 centimeters across. That's larger than a soccer ball. Larger than the eyes of a blue whale. Larger than any dinosaur. Larger than anything preserved in the fossil record. Which immediately raises an uncomfortable question. Why? Because enormous eyes are incredibly expensive. They require energy to build, energy to maintain, and energy to operate. Evolution rarely spends that kind of energy without an enormous payoff, especially in an environment where almost no sunlight exists. So why would an animal living in permanent darkness evolve the largest eyes in the history of the planet? At first, scientists assumed the answer was obvious: to hunt. But the numbers didn't agree, and once researchers started running the calculations, the mystery only became deeper.